it's time for a story. Now, in regards to my little feline companion, today we will be returning to Egypt because I wasn't too happy with my Arson Away video. And seeing as cats were sacred to Egypt, I just couldn't say no to this cute little face when she went to help. Anyways, today we'll be covering the Ptolemies in their entirety, at least the last family of them, because just covering Arson Away and shortcutting them didn't do Arson Away's story justice. So for today, we'll be covering Ptolemy the 12th Auletes, Berenike the 4th, as well as Cleopatra the 5th, 6th, and or 7th. Yeah, it gets confusing real quick, so you better buckle up. We'll get the confusing out of the way first. Now, before we start, I do need to cover something called divine marriage, which is what the Egyptians believed in. Not divine marriage, divine blood. With that, and that goes hand in hand with divine marriage. With that, they believed that their pharaohs were in a way living gods. They were the descendants of the gods, they were gods. And because of that, they wanted only godly blood on the throne. So they would often marry sibling to sibling or niece to nephew or whatever it was, even sometimes parents to kids. And that was their divine marriage. That was marrying blood to keep it as pure as possible. It's really gross. But yeah, so pretty much any time that I reference a wife or husband or something along that line, it usually means that that person is also a sibling of the other person. As unfortunate as that is, that just is the history. So with that, we'll get the Cleopatras out of the way first. Now, the records for this time, and especially in regards to Cleopatras, the first round of them, not Cleopatra the 8th and or 7th, which was the last rule of Egypt, it's confusing. Women weren't seen as equals, and the records around them are pretty shoddy. And that's because when Cleopatra the 5th and or 6th, sometimes the names are mixed up or they're the same. With that, they're usually Cleopatra the 5th is referenced as Ptolemy the 12th Auletes' wife. That's it. But Cleopatra the 6th and or 7th can often be conflated as both his daughter and or wife, but not usually at the same time. Usually if Cleopatra the 6th is referenced as his daughter, it's just his daughter. Whereas if she's referenced as his wife, she is his wife and sister. And there are two stories that go along with this. With that, if she's in the position as his wife, and for all we know, she could have been both daughter and wife. Sometimes the Egyptians took multiple wives. At least the pharaohs did. So we can't be entirely sure that she wasn't a daughter-wife. But that brings up the question of why Berenike wasn't. Like Berenike the 4th wasn't. But either way, when she's in the role of the mother, usually she dies shortly after all the kids are born or when they're very young. And that's of unknown reasons. We don't have the records of how she died or why she died. And we just don't know. If she is the daughter, usually she either dies early in her childhood or she's killed by Berenike when Berenike's coup happens. So they drop out of the story pretty quickly and there isn't much records behind them. And of course, with that, they're also sometimes conflated with Cleopatra the 7th. There are too many Cleopatras that we can't keep them all straight. With that, we'll move on to Ptolemy the 12th, Ptolemy the 12th Auletes, because even they had too many Ptolemies. So they would give them a sort of third name. Auletes was given to Ptolemy the 12th because it means flute player, and Ptolemy the 12th loved to party and play the flute. So that's how he ended up with that name. So we'll call him Ptolemy Auletes for now, just because saying Ptolemy the 12th Auletes takes forever. With that, he originally was not in line for the throne of Egypt. He was an illegitimate son with older brothers that were legitimate. With that, when his father, the pharaoh, died, his half-brother, the legitimate one, took over and took his sister Berenike III as his wife. So this is Ptolemy Auletes' sister, not his daughter. The brother took his sister as a wife, but Berenike III was well loved by the Egyptian people. So when Ptolemy the 11th, I believe he was, killed his sister, he was lynched by a mob in Egypt because they loved his sister so much, which left no legitimate heirs. No legitimate daughters, no legitimate sons. But they still believed in divine blood. So they wanted Ptolemy on the throne. So they chose Ptolemy the 12th Auletes. So he ended up ascending the throne, but of course, because he's legitimate, his claim is pretty shaky. So he turned to the big powerhouse of the time, the Roman Empire, and pretty much got buddy-buddy with them by bribing high-standing commanders like Julius Caesar and Pompey. He knew them before pretty much everything. He knew them. And they pretty much supported his rule, as long as he bribed them. So in a way, he turned Egypt, instead of a possible territory to conquer, into a legal friend of Rome, where people wouldn't attack him and they would support him. With that, in 58 BC, he was ousted from Egypt and pretty much sent into exile. He took Cleopatra the 8th, the 7th or 8th, the one you all know, the last queen of Egypt. He took her with him to Rome. Some say he stayed with Pompey, some say he stayed with another high-ranking Roman official. But we do know it wasn't Julius Caesar, because Cleopatra and Julius Caesar didn't meet until the whole carpet thing. At least, that's what records say. With that, when the advisors ousted him, they put his daughter, Berenike IV, his eldest daughter, on the throne. But they wanted Berenike IV to take a husband as her co-ruler, because they would both rule, in a way. Berenike wasn't too happy with sharing power. With that, when they made her first husband a co-ruler, she subsequently strangled him and killed him. And when they pushed her into a second marriage, they didn't ask for him to be a co-ruler, because they knew what would happen. Because she had already, as far as stories go, if you believe all of them, she strangled the husband, and she assassinated her sister, as well as several high-ranking officials that disagreed with her. Girl was not above murder, although that was a family trait. Yeah. So with that, in 55 BC, Ptolemy Auletes was able to gain enough support by bribing the Romans to be able to take a Roman army back to Egypt and take back Egypt. He subsequently executed Berenike for her attempted coup, and his reign was pretty much uneventful afterwards. He died in 51 BC of an illness. There's not really any records that suggest anything else. It was just illness. But that's pretty much the end of Auletes' story. In our next episode, we're gonna go over Arsinoe and the two Ptolemy brothers, the sons of Ptolemy Auletes. And Cleopatra, we will cover her much later in her own series of episodes, because the amount of hijinks that we have historic records for is phenomenal. Or rather, astronomical. There's a lot to cover. I hope you've enjoyed learning about them. This crazy, messed up family that just... craziness everywhere. Anyways, have a nice night.